As most of you know, life as a woman in the Elizabethan era was very different than nowadays. There were different rules for women to follow, and it was mostly for the same reason. They were taught that men were superior, not only physically, but mentally too. This is the reason why women weren't allowed to go to school or university. They needed to obey any male in the family or their husband. They had no political rights, no inheritable rights, and much more. Hey, Amity, I have a question for you. What was the women's job in society?
Women were expected to obey any other male member of the family. That includes a father, brothers, uncle, etc. Women were not allowed to work in a profession, so that includes medicine or politics. They usually worked at home and in the fields. Their day was to clean the house, cook, and take care of the children. Here is an image that could give us an idea of what it looked like when they worked. But one thing I would like to know is why were they not permitted to attend school like the boys?
As you know, women did not have the same rights as men. In the Elizabethan times, they weren't allowed to attend school or university, but they were permitted to be educated at home by private tutors. Women were expected to learn the basics of art and music studies because it was emasculating for men to learn about those subjects. Sometimes women were also able to learn some different languages, like French and Greek. Even though they could not go to school, there's an image of what a class would look like for the boys.
Personally, I believe that it was not fair, and I'm glad it's not the same anymore.
Yeah, me too. Actually, I have a marriage-related question. How was marriage in the Elizabethan era for women?
I have learned that women at the time belonged to their father. When their father died, they were taken care of by their brother and finally their husband. Since they didn't work, their job was to take care of the house and provide children, like I mentioned earlier. Marriage at the time was not for love, but for social standing. It was legal for boys to marry at the age of 14 and girls to marry at the age of 12, with their parents' permission. Divorce didn't exist until 1857, so before that it was impossible to divorce even if the husband was cruel or the marriage was bad. If a woman disobeyed their husband or any man, it was considered a crime against their religion. Here's an image of what marriage looked like before.
Wow, that's interesting, but also very hard to imagine.
I know, and I wonder how big were the families back then.
Normally, back in the day, women gave birth to a child every 2 years, but some babies died due to sickness, so some families weren't as big. Also, a lot of women made arrangements for others to take care of their child in case they passed away during the birth.
That is interesting. I didn't know this before. I believe that you know what the role of an unmarried woman was, so could you tell me more about it?
Yeah, of course. Being an unmarried woman was very frowned upon. Women who were married was classified as single. The majority of single women were of low class. Oftentimes, they would spend their lives in a nunnery or convent. However, they were being destroyed at that time. As a result, they would have to find an alternative, which was domestic services. This included being hired to do the cleaning, cooking, care for children, etc.
There was a lot expected from women at the time.
Yeah, although I would like to learn more about the political side of things. Could you tell me about it?
Women in the Elizabethan era did not have the right to vote. The only way a woman could have political power was if they were royalty, only if the crown was passed on to them, which was the reason why Queen Elizabeth never married. She didn't want to lose her power to a man. Here's the second picture of the Virgin Queen. In May 1918, the law against women's political rights was revoked. All women over 21 years old could now vote.
It's surprising how recently this rule was changed.
Yes, Annika, I agree. Looking at today, we have some dress code at school, and I wonder if it was the same back then, or if they had a different style.
That's a good question. Women of lower class in Shakespearean times wore outfits that incorporated a long-sleeved dress that served as undergarment. Then there was a kirtle, a sleeveless full-length dress that was put over the undergarment. A kirtle was made up of tightly laced-up fronts, like a corset. They also had shoes made of leather. The wealthier women wore petticoats as undergarments. They then put corset and skirt of color over it. The skirts held up by hoops to give them shape. A bodice was placed over the corset. And then to finish it all off, a floor-length coat or dressing gown was draped over them.
That's so cool. I wonder what it looked like.
Actually, I have a picture right here. Take a look.
It's so cool that you could find an image of this.
We mentioned a lot of rules earlier. Are there any that we missed?
There is, actually. There was a law against women acting in theater. The women's characters were played by boys whose voice had not broken yet. They also couldn't be an active member in the army, but they were allowed to be a nurse in the army, although their positions weren't always paid. This changed just recently in 1942 when the army needed recruits.
Yes, I think I read that somewhere. Do you want to know an interesting fact?
Yeah, go ahead.
Women who attended plays with men at the time were often presumed to be prostitutes, for the reason being that theater was considered to be a sinful place. It was also frowned upon for women to watch plays in the theater because most people believed that they should be at home caring for their children instead.
That's interesting. Anyways, in class we read a novel, Q for Treason, and we learned that women weren't allowed to act. When did that change? Who was the first woman on stage?
The first female actress was Margaret Hughes. Her first performance on stage was December 8th, 1660, in one of Shakespeare's plays called Othello. She was also 15 years old, almost like Kit in the novel. There's a picture of her.
If it was not for her, I don't know when this rule would have changed.
I know. I heard the other day that women had no inheritable rights at the time. Is that true?
Yes, it is. Inheritance law stated that lands and properties were always passed to the eldest son, no matter how many daughters there were in the family, and no matter what their age were, it was going to the son. If there were no men in the family, there was an exception. It was going to the eldest daughter, but there were rules and she could never inherit a title.
That seems extremely unfair.
I know, right? I feel like women were always expected to behave in some specific way.
And that's true. Men were seen as stronger than women, more courageous, determined, and intelligent. On the other hand, women were said to be controlled by their emotions, and were expected to be modest and compassionate all the time. Men were more aggressive, and women were more passive.
But now, I could say that lots of women are stronger than men and don't let themselves be controlled by them.
Yes, and I'm glad now we lived in a world where there's more equality between them. I will not say everything is accepted, but there's a smaller amount of unfair rules for women to follow.
Also, not all, but most of the women can now do whatever they want without being judged. Thanks for listening.